Pull the plug, doctor. We are not paying for an expensive surgery when she is practically a vegetable anyway. My own mother negotiated my life like she was returning a defective handbag at a department store. I was trapped inside my own paralyzed body, screaming in the dark, but no one could hear me. When I finally woke up, I did not cry. I did something much worse that left her completely bankrupt in exactly 24 hours. My name is Meredith. I am 33 years old, and as a forensic accountant, I uncover hidden financial truths for a living. I am trained to look past the lies people tell and find the ugly truth hidden in the numbers. I just never expected the most horrifying numbers I would ever audit to be the price tag of my own survival. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever realized the people who should protect you are actually your biggest threat. The rhythmic, mechanical beeping of a heart monitor was the first thing that pierced the heavy darkness. The sharp smell of antiseptic and rubbing alcohol filled my nostrils. I tried to flutter my eyelids, but they felt cemented shut. I tried to twitch a single finger, but my limbs were like heavy blocks of lead. A cold, suffocating panic surged through my chest as I realized I was entirely paralyzed. I was experiencing temporary locked-in syndrome, trapped inside my own mind after what I vaguely remembered as the terrifying sound of crushing metal and shattering glass on the interstate. I could not move. I could not speak. But my hearing was crystal clear. Footsteps approached my bed, the squeak of rubber soles on linoleum. Then the voice of a man I would later know as Dr. Mitchell spoke. His tone was calm, professional, yet laced with a distinct urgency. He explained my condition to someone standing at the foot of my bed. He said my brain activity was stable, but I had suffered severe spinal trauma from the car crash. He stated that I required an immediate, highly specialized decompression surgery. Without it, the nerve damage would become permanent. The cost of the procedure was approximately $150,000, and because I was currently incapacitated, he needed my next of kin to sign the consent forms to proceed. A sharp, familiar scoff echoed in the sterile room. It was a harsh, calculating sound I had heard a million times growing up in our affluent suburban home. It was my mother, Beatrice. $150,000. She asked, her voice dripping with disbelief and annoyance. For what? A slim chance she might just lie there drooling for the rest of her life. Absolutely not. I screamed in my mind. I am in here. I am awake. I can hear you. But the heart monitor just kept its steady rhythmic pace, betraying my internal terror. Dr. Mitchell sighed, clearly taken aback by her coldness. Mrs. Beatrice Meredith is a young woman. She has a very strong chance of a full recovery if we act quickly. This surgery is her best option to regain mobility. My mother cut him off, her tone sharp and dismissive. Her health insurance does not cover this specific out-of-network surgical team, doctor, and I am certainly not draining my personal accounts or taking out loans for a lost cause. She is essentially brain dead. Look at her. The cruelty of her words hit me harder than the impact of the car crash. This was the woman who had brought me into the world. The woman who lived a lavish lifestyle of country club dinners and luxury cars, standing over my broken body and weighing my life against a financial inconvenience. She was already doing the math in her head, calculating the return on investment of her own daughter. To her, I was just a bad asset. Doctor, my mother continued, her voice taking on that sickeningly sweet fake tone she used when she wanted to get her way. It breaks my heart to see my daughter like this. But we have to be realistic. She would not want to live as a burden to her family. What are the other options? The cheaper options. There was a heavy silence in the room. I could almost feel the doctor staring at her in absolute disbelief. This is not about cheaper options, he replied strictly. This is about saving her quality of life. Without this intervention, she may remain in this state permanently. Then let nature take its course. Beatrice snapped back, dropping the grieving mother act entirely. I am not authorizing a six-figure medical bill that will ultimately fall on me when she dies anyway. Just keep her comfortable. That is my final decision. Every word was a physical blow. I lay there trapped in my silent prison listening to my mother sentence me to a lifetime of paralysis simply to protect her bank account. The sheer audacity of her greed was suffocating. She did not ask if I was in pain. She did not hold my hand. She only saw a massive bill she refused to pay. As I lay in the dark, the initial terror slowly morphed into something else. A cold, burning rage. If I survived this, I promised myself I would make her regret the day she put a price tag on my life. The harsh scratching sound of a ballpoint pen pressing against paper echoed in the quiet hospital room. It was the sound of my mother legally signing away my right to a future. Dr. Mitchell stood frozen for a moment. He looked from the signed "Do Not Resuscitate" order in his hand down to my motionless body, his expression tight with professional disapproval. He told my mother the hospital would honor her directive as my medical proxy, but he strongly advised her to reconsider over the next 24 hours. Beatrice simply crossed her arms and looked away. The doctor turned on his heel and walked out, the heavy wooden door clicking shut behind him. The silence in the room lasted exactly 5 seconds before the door swung open again. Heavy, confident footsteps marched in, followed by the sharp clicking of high heels. I did not need to open my eyes to know who had arrived. It was my younger sister Whitney and her husband Trey. Trey was a 31-year-old African-American man who carried himself with the unearned arrogance of a billionaire. I could smell the overpowering cloud of his cheap cologne before he even spoke. He was wearing one of his counterfeit designer tracksuits and the fake gold luxury watch he loved to flash around on his social media pages. Whitney, at 29, was essentially a younger clone of our mother, entirely dependent on others to fund her lifestyle while proudly calling herself a digital content creator. They walked right up to my hospital bed. I waited for the gasps of shock. I waited for my sister to cry, to hold my hand, to show a single ounce of human empathy for her older sister who was lying broken in a neck brace and hooked up to a noisy ventilator. Instead, Whitney simply sighed loudly. "Well, she looks terrible," Whitney said, her voice completely devoid of emotion. "Is she going to wake up or what?" Beatrice did not correct her disrespectful tone. "No, the doctor says she is practically gone. I just signed the DNR paperwork. It is the most humane thing to do for her and honestly the most practical thing for all of us. We simply cannot afford to keep her on expensive life support indefinitely." Trey let out a low whistle. "Damn, that is tough. But listen, Beatrice. We need to talk logistics right now. You are the primary beneficiary on all her accounts, right? What about that corporate life insurance policy she gets through her firm?" My blood ran ice cold. I was lying right in front of them, my heart still beating, my brain fully functional, and they were already divvying up my assets like starving vultures picking at a fresh carcass. "Yes," Beatrice answered briskly, speaking as casually as if she were discussing the weather. "Her corporate firm provides a $2 million life insurance policy. Since she is unmarried and has no children, everything defaults to me as her next of kin. I need to call the Human Resources Department tomorrow morning to see how fast they can process the death certificate and release the funds." $2 million, Trey repeated, rolling the massive number around in his mouth. "Man, we could finally pay off the mortgage on the house and fully fund my new investment portfolio. This tragedy might actually be the financial break we desperately need." I remembered sitting across from Trey at our family Thanksgiving dinner just a few months ago, watching him drink the expensive wine I had paid for while he loudly mocked my career. He laughed right in my face and called my forensic accounting job a boring desk trap for people who lacked real hustle, completely unaware that my steady salary was the only reason his mother-in-law had not lost her house yet. Now this arrogant man was eagerly waiting for my heart to stop so he could steal the wealth he was too lazy to build. Whitney chimed in, her voice buzzing with sudden excitement. "Mom, if you get the payout by next month, you promised you would help Trey and me put a massive down payment on that penthouse downtown. You said it yourself, Meredith never even enjoyed her money. She just hoarded it. It is only fair that it goes to people who know how to live life." I lay there a prisoner in my own flesh, absorbing every venomous word. They were not mourning a daughter or a sister. They were celebrating a lottery win. The three of them stood around my bed, casually planning their luxury purchases while the machine beside me pumped air into my fragile lungs. They thought I was a silent, empty shell. They thought I was already a ghost. But they were incredibly wrong. The horrific betrayal I was witnessing did not break my spirit. It ignited a ferocious, burning will to survive. I spent my life dismantling financial frauds and ruining criminals. And right then, I decided my family would be my very next target. It took exactly 48 hours for Dr. Mitchell to notice the deliberate, desperate movement of my pupils. While my mother was busy picking out funeral arrangements, I was fighting my way back to the surface. The moment the paralysis broke enough for me to breathe on my own, the ventilator was removed. My first raspy, agonizing words were not a plea for my family. I demanded that the hospital place me under a strict privacy blackout using federal medical privacy laws. I instructed the nursing staff that Beatrice, Whitney, and Trey were permanently banned from receiving any updates about my condition. They were to be told absolutely nothing. My second sentence was a demand to call my trust lawyer, Mr. Kaplan. From my hospital bed, I ordered him to execute an emergency freeze on every single financial asset, bank account, and property deed in my name. With the legal blockade in place, I was secretly transferred to a private, secure rehabilitation wing on the other side of the hospital. It was there, propped up against uncomfortable pillows and holding my newly charged smartphone, that the real investigation began. I opened the smart home security application connected to my downtown luxury penthouse. The screen loaded, displaying the crisp, high-definition feeds from the cameras I had installed in every room and hallway. I expected to see my empty apartment collecting dust while I fought for my life. Instead, a motion alert immediately flashed in bright red letters across the top of my screen. Someone was at my front door. I tapped the notification, pulling up the live video feed from the hallway. There stood Whitney and Trey, dragging 4 massive battered suitcases across the expensive marble flooring of my building. Trey was holding a heavy-duty power drill, while Whitney impatiently checked her fake designer watch. My heart pounded a slow, angry rhythm against my ribs as I watched Trey press the drill directly into the center of my custom smart lock. The screeching sound of metal tearing through metal echoed through my phone speaker. He was literally breaking into my home. The heavy oak door swung open, and the two of them stumbled inside, kicking their cheap luggage onto my pristine white living room rug. I switched the view to the interior living room camera, turning the volume all the way up. The audio was crystal clear. Trey dropped the drill onto my expensive glass coffee table, completely scratching the surface. He let out a loud, triumphant laugh, stretching his arms out wide as he spun around the massive living room. "Look at this place," Trey shouted, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "I told you we would not have to wait long. This is exactly the kind of upgrade we deserve." Whitney immediately threw herself onto my velvet sofa, kicking her dirty shoes up onto the cushions. "It is even bigger than I remembered," she said, pulling a bottle of my expensive imported water out of the refrigerator. "Mom said the life insurance payout might take a few weeks to process, but there is no reason we cannot get comfortable right now. Besides, Meredith is not going to need this place anymore." Trey walked over to my custom-built entertainment center, running his hands over the massive flat-screen television and the high-end audio equipment. He grinned, a greedy, predatory look in his eyes. "The dead girl sure knew how to live, I will give her that. But honestly, her style is a little too boring for my taste. We can sell most of this boring furniture online by the weekend. People will pay top dollar for this stuff. We will use the cash to buy some real luxury pieces. We are taking over her entire life today. We are officially penthouse owners." I sat in my hospital bed, staring at the screen with a terrifying calmness. They had not even waited for a doctor to officially pronounce me dead. They had simply assumed I was gone and immediately started looting my life like grave robbers. Trey walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the city skyline, already acting as if he had earned the view through hard work instead of praying for my demise. Whitney was busy opening my mail, tossing my private documents onto the floor. I did not shed a single tear. Tears were for victims, and I was not a victim anymore. I pressed the record button on my smart home application, saving every single second of their break indirectly to my secure cloud server. They thought they had hit the jackpot, but they had just handed me the exact evidence I needed to destroy them, and I was going to make them pay dearly for this. I tapped the screen of my smartphone, switching the live video feed from the living room to the secure underground parking garage of my building. I had installed a dedicated camera right above my assigned parking space after someone scratched my bumper last year. Now that same high-definition camera was broadcasting my brother-in-law strutting toward my pristine white Tesla Model S. Trey had found the spare key fob I kept in the entryway bowl. He unlocked the car, the headlights flashing brightly in the dim garage, and let out a loud whoop of excitement that echoed sharply off the concrete walls. He did not just get in and drive away. He spent the next 10 minutes treating my car like a movie set. I watched in absolute disgust as Trey leaned against the hood, pulling out his smartphone to record a live video for his Instagram followers. I could hear his muffled voice boasting about his new electric vehicle, claiming his massive success in the cryptocurrency market had finally paid off. He was literally using my near-fatal car accident to build his fake online persona. After getting the perfect camera angles and bragging to his gullible audience about his imaginary wealth, he finally climbed into the driver's seat. He peeled out of the parking space, the tires screeching loudly on the polished concrete, taking my car for a joyride while I sat in a hospital bed with a fractured spine. I calmly opened a secondary application on my phone and tracked the vehicle through the built-in GPS system, taking multiple screenshots of his route and his speed. Every single mile he drove was another count of grand theft auto I could hand directly to the police when the time was right. Once the garage camera feed went quiet, a new notification popped up on my screen. Motion detected in the primary bedroom. I switched the feed again, bracing myself for whatever fresh violation was happening in my most private space. The camera mounted on my bedroom bookshelf showed the heavy wooden door swinging open. It was not Whitney this time. It was Beatrice. My mother marched into my bedroom with a stack of heavy-duty black trash bags in one hand and a large canvas tote bag in the other. If I had any lingering hope that my mother was secretly grieving her eldest daughter, that foolish hope evaporated the second she started clearing off my nightstand. She did not pause to look at the framed photograph of us from my college graduation. She did not shed a single tear. She simply swept the silver frame along with my favorite books and my bedside lamp straight into the black trash bag. The glass frame shattered against the floor, but Beatrice did not flinch. She was systematically erasing my existence from the apartment like I was a terrible tenant who had been evicted. She moved to my custom walk-in closet, and her demeanor instantly changed from irritated to overjoyed. She dropped the trash bags and picked up the canvas tote. I watched my mother meticulously select my most expensive designer handbags, examining the fine stitching and the brand logos as if she were shopping at a high-end boutique. She shoved a vintage Chanel purse and 2 pristine Hermes bags into her tote. Then she opened my velvet-lined jewelry drawer. The microphone picked up her humming a cheerful tune as she scooped up my diamond tennis bracelet, pearl earrings, and the expensive gold watch I bought myself after my first corporate promotion. She was packing up hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of my hard-earned assets, completely ignoring the sentimental items I truly cherished. My favorite childhood stuffed animal was tossed into the trash bag, but my diamond earrings went straight into her coat pocket. I stared at the screen, my heart beating slowly. A forensic accountant does not react with emotion when they find a massive discrepancy in the ledger. They quietly gather the receipts. They meticulously build the case. And right now, Beatrice was giving me an overwhelming mountain of undeniable evidence. I used the screen recording feature on my phone to capture every single moment of her shameless looting. I made sure the timestamps were visible on the video file. My own mother was stripping my life bare before my body was even cold. She was packing up my achievements to fund her fake suburban lifestyle. She thought she was clever hiding her theft while supposedly grieving. But she had no idea she was starring in a high-definition documentary of her own crimes. The evidence was secured and the trap was slowly being set. I just needed to wait for her to make her next arrogant move. The screen on my smartphone flickered as another notification popped up over the video feed of my bedroom. The front door camera had detected motion again. I watched Beatrice quickly shove my diamond earrings deep into her coat pocket and grab her canvas tote bag, rushing out of my bedroom to answer the chime. I switched the feed back to the main living area. Standing in the foyer was a man in an ill-fitting gray suit carrying a worn leather briefcase. He had slicked back hair and the eager, hungry posture of a shark smelling blood in the water. I recognized him immediately. His name was Donovan, a notoriously shady broker who specialized in rapid off-market cash sales. He was the kind of guy people called when they were facing bankruptcy or divorce and needed to liquidate their assets overnight without asking too many questions. Beatrice greeted him with a wide, overly enthusiastic smile, completely dropping the grieving mother routine she had practiced at the hospital. "Come in, Donovan," she said, gesturing grandly to my expansive living room. "As you can see, the property is in absolute pristine condition. Hardwood floors throughout custom marble countertops and an unobstructed view of the downtown skyline." Donovan let out a low whistle, his eyes scanning the high ceilings and the expensive fixtures. "This is a premium unit, Beatrice. You do not see penthouses in this building go on the market very often. If we stage this right and list it properly, we could easily pull in around 3.5 million, maybe more if we get a bidding war going." My mother waved her hand dismissively, her face tightening with impatience. "I do not have time for staging, Donovan, and I certainly do not have time to wait for a public listing or a bidding war. I need a cash buyer, and I need this transaction completed by the end of the month." Donovan paused, raising an eyebrow. "End of the month. Beatrice, you know how these luxury sales work. Even a fast closing takes time, especially with probate courts. The legal owner is your daughter, correct?" "I heard about the terrible car accident." Beatrice let out a heavy, dramatic sigh that sounded completely manufactured. "Yes, my poor Meredith. She is practically brain-dead, entirely hooked up to machines. The doctors say it is only a matter of days now. As her next of kin and her medical proxy, I have the power of attorney. I need to liquidate this property immediately to cover her massive medical debts and handle the estate taxes before everything gets tied up in the court system for a year." It was a blatant, calculated lie. The power of attorney she held was strictly for medical decisions, not real estate liquidation. Furthermore, selling a property under the guise of paying medical debts while secretly pocketing the cash was textbook wire fraud and a severe breach of fiduciary duty. She was trying to illegally sell my home while my heart was still beating. "I am willing to take a significant cut," Beatrice continued, lowering her voice as if she were sharing a secret. "If you have a cash buyer who can close the deal quietly and quickly, I will accept 2.5 million. That gives your buyer an instant $1 million in equity and you get a double commission. But the paperwork needs to start today." Donovan smiled, a slick, greedy grin spreading across his face. He did not ask to see the legal documents. He did not question the morality of selling the home of a dying woman out from under her. 2.5 million cash for a skyline penthouse. I know 3 offshore investors who will wire the funds by Friday for a deal like this. Consider it done, Beatrice. I lay perfectly still in my hospital bed, staring at the glowing screen of my phone. The audacity was breathtaking. My mother was not just stealing my jewelry. She was actively conspiring to commit massive real estate fraud to rob me of my biggest asset. I tapped the screen, securely uploading the entire high-definition audio and video recording directly to my encrypted cloud server. Every word they spoke was permanently saved and legally admissible. They had literally filmed their own confession to conspiracy and fraud. As Donovan shook the hand of my mother and finally let himself out of the penthouse, I felt a sharp, cold smile form on my face. Beatrice was desperate for cash. That was incredibly obvious now. She was rushing a multi-million-dollar real estate scam because she needed immediate liquidity. I just needed to figure out exactly why she was so desperate. And I knew her next move would be trying to access my liquid savings. Mr. Kaplan. My trust lawyer walked into my private rehabilitation room just after lunch. He was a sharp man in his 60s who did not tolerate fools. He pulled up a chair next to my bed and placed his tablet on my tray table. "Meredith," he said with a grim smile, "your mother just tried to rob the downtown bank branch." As my attorney and the designated executor of my estate, Kaplan had direct contact with the branch manager. The manager had recognized Beatrice from previous family deposits, but noticed the discrepancies immediately. He tapped the screen of his tablet, playing an audio file the branch manager had legally captured during the fraud incident. Beatrice had marched into the high-wealth client lobby, wearing her oversized designer sunglasses, acting like she owned the building. She slammed a freshly printed medical power of attorney onto the mahogany desk. She demanded an immediate wire transfer of $300,000 from my high-yield savings account to her personal checking account. She told the teller it was for life-saving experimental treatments. This was a spectacularly bold lie, considering she had literally signed my death warrant 48 hours earlier. The teller, following the emergency freeze protocol Kaplan had initiated, flagged the transaction. The banking system showed a hard legal lock. When the teller politely informed Beatrice that the funds were completely inaccessible due to an executor mandate, the grieving mother mask violently slipped off. The branch manager, a meticulous woman named Brenda, stepped out of her office to intervene. Brenda calmly explained that the power of attorney document Beatrice presented was legally insufficient to bypass an active trust freeze. Beatrice completely lost her mind. She screamed at the top of her lungs, her voice echoing off the marble walls of the quiet bank lobby. "Do you have any idea who I am?" she shrieked, slamming her perfectly manicured fists against the polished counter. "My daughter is dying, and you greedy corporate monsters are holding her money hostage. I will sue this bank into the ground. I will have all of your jobs by tomorrow morning." Other wealthy clients in the lobby stopped what they were doing and stared in shock. Uniformed security guards immediately started walking toward her. Brenda remained perfectly calm, stating that she could not release a single penny without direct authorization from my legal trust officer. Beatrice picked up a heavy metal pen holder from the teller counter and hurled it at the bulletproof glass partition. It bounced off with a loud clatter. She loudly accused the bank staff of stealing from a devastated, grieving mother. She completely embarrassed herself in front of the affluent local community she always desperately tried to impress. The security guards finally grabbed her by the arms and physically escorted her out of the double-glass doors while she kicked and cursed. Brenda immediately called Mr. Kaplan to report the severe security breach and sent over a scanned copy of the forged document my mother had tried to use. I looked at the forged power of attorney displayed on the tablet screen. The signature at the bottom was a sloppy, frantic imitation of my handwriting. Beatrice had officially committed felony forgery on top of attempted wire fraud. She was spiraling rapidly out of control because her financial safety net was collapsing. The massive suburban mansion she lived in was clearly bleeding her dry, and her golden child daughter and lazy son-in-law were useless financial parasites. My $300,000 was supposed to be her quick escape hatch. Without it, she was suddenly drowning in her own secret debts. Mr. Kaplan looked at me over the rim of his reading glasses. "She is getting dangerously desperate, Meredith. Attempting to bypass a federal banking freeze with forged documents carries a mandatory state prison sentence. Shall I involve the police authorities right now?" I shook my head slowly, feeling the physical strength finally returning to my neck muscles. "No," I replied, my voice hoarse but completely steady. "Not yet. If we arrest her right now, she will play the victim to the entire family. She will claim the immense grief of my accident made her act crazy. I want her to feel the exact same total crushing helplessness she forced onto me when she told the doctor to pull my plug. We let her keep digging her own grave." Kaplan nodded in silent agreement. He then handed me my smartphone, which had been buzzing relentlessly for the past hour. Beatrice had realized she could not get the cash from the bank teller. The branch manager had permanently stonewalled her, So, she resorted to terrorizing my personal device entirely unaware that I was the one holding it. The screen lit up, revealing unhinged texts. The first text message arrived in all capital letters. It read, "You selfish brat, where are the offshore accounts? Tell me before you brain dead." Another message immediately followed. "I know you are hiding cash from me, Meredith. I am your mother and I deserve compensation for everything I have done for you. Tell the lawyer to lift the freeze right now, or I swear I will make sure they pull your plug tonight." I stared at the glowing screen of my smartphone. The sheer malice radiating from those text messages was almost hard to comprehend. Beatrice was not just a greedy woman anymore. She was a cornered animal lashing out violently because her financial house of cards was finally collapsing. She actually threatened to murder me by proxy just to get her hands on my savings. I looked up at Mr. Kaplan, who was quietly observing my reaction. He had seen decades of ugly family estate battles, but even he looked slightly appalled by the raw, brutal cruelty of my mother. I locked the screen of my phone and handed it back to him. "I am done resting," I said firmly, throwing the thin hospital blanket off my legs. "I need to get out of this hospital bed today." Dr. Mitchell walked into the room a few minutes later to do his afternoon rounds. When I told him I was checking out immediately, he tried to protest. He reminded me that my spine was still healing and that I needed at least another week of intensive physical therapy inside the private rehabilitation center. I told him I did not have a week to spare. My family was actively dismantling my life, and I had to stop them before they sold my penthouse to a shady real estate broker. Seeing the absolute determination in my eyes, Dr. Mitchell finally sighed and agreed to sign my discharge papers under the strict condition that I use a heavy-duty mobility cane and attend regular outpatient therapy sessions. Mr. Kaplan had anticipated my move. He opened his leather briefcase and handed me a set of clean clothes he had retrieved from my secondary gym locker. As I slowly changed out of the degrading hospital gown, every movement sent a sharp ache radiating up my back. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the burning adrenaline pumping through my veins. I slipped on my tailored black blazer and gripped the sturdy wooden cane the physical therapist had just provided for me. I looked at my reflection in the small bathroom mirror. I was very pale and I had a dark bruise fading along my jawline from the steering wheel impact. But my eyes were sharp and completely devoid of fear. I did not look like a victim anymore. I looked like a woman going to war. I walked back into the hospital room where Mr. Kaplan was waiting. He handed me a thick manila folder containing the preliminary financial reports his paralegals had started compiling on Beatrice and Trey. The initial numbers were much worse than I originally thought. "We have a highly solid legal case," Meredith Kaplan said, packing up his tablet. "We can file civil injunctions against them by tomorrow morning to stop the bleeding." I shook my head, leaning heavily on my new cane. "Injunctions are too quiet, Kaplan. If we just file paperwork, Beatrice will spin a web of lies and play the victim to our extended family. She thrives on controlling the narrative. I need to strip her of that control publicly and permanently. She thinks I am lying in a coma waiting to die. I am going to show her exactly how alive I am." Kaplan checked his luxury watch and gave me a grim, supportive smile. "Well, if you want a public audience, you are in luck. Your mother is hosting a massive dinner gathering tonight at the expensive downtown steakhouse. She invited all of your aunts, uncles, and distant cousins. She is framing it as a vigil for you, but my sources tell me she has set up a massive crowdfunding campaign online. She is using the dinner to launch a fake medical fund to collect tax-free donations from our grieving relatives. A fake charity dinner to line her own pockets while pretending to mourn my imminent death. It was the absolute peak of her twisted financial narcissism. She was trying to squeeze every last penny out of my existence. But tonight, she was going to learn a very hard lesson about consequences. I tightened my grip on the handle of my wooden cane and walked slowly toward the heavy hospital room door. The time for hiding was officially over, and the reckoning was here. "Let us go crash a family party," I said. "We simply do not know how much time Meredith has left." Beatrice dabbed at the corner of her eye with a monogrammed silk handkerchief, her voice trembling with perfectly rehearsed sorrow. She stood at the head of a candlelit table inside the Sterling Room, the city's most exclusive private dining club. Around her sat 30 of our wealthiest relatives and family friends, their faces painted with sympathetic grief. Beatrice gestured to the gold-embossed QR codes placed next to every crystal wine glass. The experimental treatments are bleeding us dry. My sister was always so stubborn, refusing to ask for help when her condition worsened. But as her older sister, I have to step up. The GoFundMe has already reached $20,000, but the clinic requires $80,000 by tomorrow morning. Please open your hearts and your wallets for Meredith. A chorus of pitying murmurs rippled through the room. Aunt Clara reached for her designer purse. Uncle Robert pulled out his phone to scan the donation code. $80,000 is a fascinating number, Beatrice. The heavy oak doors of the Sterling Room swung shut behind me with a resounding thud. Every head at the table snapped in my direction. I did not look like a woman clinging to her final days. I wore a tailored emerald green blazer, my posture perfectly straight, leaning slightly on a silver-handled cane. My hair was blown out, my makeup flawless. I walked forward, the sharp click of my cane against the marble floor, cutting through the stunned silence. Beatrice's jaw dropped. The silk handkerchief slipped from her fingers. Meredith, what are you doing out of the facility? You are supposed to be in strict quarantine. A quarantine for a torn ACL and a mild hairline fracture. I arched an eyebrow, stopping at the foot of the table. That sounds like medical malpractice, or more likely another one of your elaborate lies. She is delirious, our mother shouted, jumping up from her seat next to Beatrice. She rushed toward me, her hands outstretched as if to corral an escaped mental patient. Meredith, you are embarrassing the family. You are clearly confused from the heavy pain medications. Let the valet call you a cab immediately. I stepped out of my mother's reach, my cane planting firmly between us. The only thing I am confused about, Mother, is why Aunt Clara and Uncle Robert are being asked to fund a surgery I already had 3 weeks ago, a surgery that was fully covered by my premium insurance. A loud gasp escaped Aunt Clara. She dropped her phone onto the table. Fully covered? Beatrice just told us you were facing experimental stem cell treatments for a degenerative nerve disease. Stem cells. I laughed, a sharp, cold sound. I reached into my blazer pocket and pulled out a stack of folded bank statements, tossing them directly onto the center of the dining table. Please feel free to pass these around. They are the financial routing details for Beatrice's little GoFundMe project. You will notice the donations are not going to any medical facility. They are being routed directly into an offshore holding account registered to Beatrice's newly established shell company. Beatrice turned the color of ash. She lunged for the papers, but Uncle Robert snatched them up first. His eyes scanned the highlighted routing numbers and the transaction history attached to the back. What is this? Uncle Robert's voice boomed over the whispers of the guests. A $12,000 down payment on a sports car, $7,000 at a luxury boutique in Paris. Beatrice, you told me my $5,000 donation was paying for Meredith's life-saving ventilator. It is a misunderstanding, Beatrice stammered, her voice pitching an octave higher as she backed away from the table. I was securing the funds. Caregiver burnout is a real medical issue, Uncle Robert. Dealing with Meredith's constant drama took a severe toll on my mental health. I needed those wellness purchases to stay strong for her. Caregiver burnout. I stared at my sister with pure disgust. Beatrice, you have not visited me once in 6 months. I hired a private physical therapist with my own money. You did not even know which hospital I was admitted to until I posted a photo on social media. Shut your mouth, our mother hissed, her face contorting with rage. She completely abandoned the concerned parent act, stepping defensively in front of her golden child. Your sister spent weeks organizing this beautiful dinner to support you, and you storm in here throwing wild accusations. You have always been a jealous, spiteful girl. You cannot stand to see Beatrice receiving attention, even when she is acting out of the goodness of her heart. Goodness of her heart. I signaled the restaurant's general manager, who had been waiting quietly near the entrance. He stepped forward and handed me a leather billfold. I flipped it open and held it up for the entire table to see. This charity dinner cost $15,000, I announced, staring dead into my mother's eyes. Truffle risotto, Wagyu beef, and vintage champagne. A lavish feast to raise money for a dying sister. But the most interesting part is the credit card Beatrice used to secure the reservation. I pulled the black titanium card from the billfold and tossed it onto my mother's empty plate. She charged this entire fake charity gala to the corporate account of my design firm, the same firm you all confidently told the extended family went bankrupt 6 months ago. The dining room erupted. Aunt Clara demanded her money back immediately while 2 other cousins stood up, pulling out their phones to cancel their credit card transactions. Beatrice backed away, bumping into a waiter. "No, Mother, tell them. Tell them she gave me the card. Tell them she is crazy." Our mother opened her mouth to defend her golden child once again, but the shrill wail of approaching police sirens outside the restaurant cut her off. The flashing red and blue lights reflected against the frosted windows of the private dining room, casting long, frantic shadows across Beatrice's terrified face. I smiled at my sister, adjusting my grip on my silver cane. I forgot to mention, when I saw the fraudulent $15,000 charge hit my corporate account an hour ago, I did not just call the restaurant to investigate. I called the authorities. The flashing red and blue lights illuminated the frosted glass of the dining room doors. Panic flashed across Beatrice's eyes as she realized she was cornered, but she was a master of manipulation. In a fraction of a second, her entire demeanor shifted. The terrified, guilty scam artist vanished. In her place stood a woman radiating overwhelming maternal warmth. She let out a loud theatrical sob of pure joy and lunged toward me, arms wide open, playing the role of the relieved mother to absolute perfection. "Meredith? Oh, my sweet girl, it is a miracle," she wailed, her voice thick with manufactured emotion. "You are out of bed. The experimental treatments must have worked. I was so exhausted, so overwhelmed by the heavy burden of being your sole caretaker. I must have gotten the accounting mixed up. But none of that matters now. My baby sister is healed." She reached out to pull me into a tight embrace, completely ignoring the fact that she had just been exposed for embezzling $15,000. I did not flinch. I simply raised the silver handle of my cane and pressed it firmly against her collarbone, stopping her dead in her tracks. "Do not touch me," I said, my voice dropping to an icy whisper that carried across the silent room. "And spare us the miraculous recovery act. The police are walking through the lobby right now." Our mother rushed forward, placing a protective hand on Beatrice's shoulder. "Meredith, have you lost your mind? Your sister has been sick with worry. She stepped up when you were helpless. She acted like a mother to you when you could not care for yourself. Are you truly going to let the authorities arrest her over a misunderstood credit card charge?" "A misunderstood charge," I chuckled, a dry, humorless sound that made my mother step back. "Is that the narrative we are going with? I suppose the fake GoFundMe was just a typo. But tell me, Mother, was the DNR a misunderstanding too?" Uncle Robert stepped forward, his face pale, his voice trembling with confusion. "A DNR do not resuscitate, Meredith. What on earth are you talking about?" Without breaking eye contact with Beatrice, I pulled my smartphone from my blazer pocket. Earlier this evening, before making my grand entrance, I had paid the restaurant's audiovisual technician a very generous cash tip to grant me access to their network. A single swipe on my screen paired my device directly to the high-fidelity Bluetooth speakers embedded in the ceiling of the Sterling room. "Let us review the true depths of Beatrice's maternal care," I announced loudly so the entire table could hear. Exactly 4 weeks ago, I was heavily sedated in the recovery ward after orthopedic surgery. Beatrice, who legally appointed herself as my temporary medical proxy, while I was unconscious, demanded a private consultation with my attending physician. Luckily for me, the hospital legally records all proxy-level directives to prevent foul play. I pressed play. The soft ambient jazz music in the restaurant cut out instantly, replaced by a sharp hiss of static. Then the crisp professional voice of Dr. Aris filled the dining room. "Miss Sterling, your sister is completely stable." The doctor's recorded voice echoed from above. "The joint repair went flawlessly. She will need physical therapy, but she is in zero critical danger." Then came Beatrice's voice. It was not the tearful, loving tone she had just used. It was cold, sharp, and brutally impatient. "Stable. Are you absolutely sure? Because she looks terrible, doctor. What if her heart simply gives out from the trauma? I know my sister better than anyone. She would never want to live as a burden to her family. If she codes, I want it on record that you do not intervene. I am drafting a do not resuscitate order immediately. Let her pass quietly." A collective horrified gasp ripped through the room. The sound of a wine glass shattering echoed from the back as Aunt Clara dropped her drink. Uncle Robert stared at Beatrice with absolute disgust, his fists clenched at his sides. The wealthy family friends who had been weeping with sympathy just 5 minutes earlier now looked at my sister as if she were a monster. I tapped my screen, silencing the recording. The heavy, suffocating quiet returned. Beatrice's face was completely drained of color, but her survival instincts kicked in. She squared her shoulders, looked directly at Aunt Clara, and attempted the most audacious gaslighting campaign of her life. "You are taking that completely out of context," Beatrice shouted, her voice shrill and desperate as she pointed a shaking finger at me. "You do not understand medical terminology. The doctors were lying to protect themselves. They told me privately that the anesthesia might cause permanent brain damage. They said you would end up a vegetable, Meredith. I was being merciful. I was making the ultimate sacrifice to save you from a life of pure agony." Mother immediately backed her up, turning fiercely toward the stunned crowd. "Listen to her. Beatrice was protecting her. She was making the hard choices we were too weak to make. A life of pure agony." I asked, my tone deadly calm as I stared down my mother and sister. "From a skiing accident that cracked my tibia. You were not protecting me, Beatrice. You were just trying to clear the path to my estate." I did not stay to watch the police place Beatrice in handcuffs. As two uniformed officers pushed through the frosted glass doors of the Sterling room, I simply turned on my heel and walked out. The frantic shouts of my mother and the desperate sobbing of my sister faded behind me, drowned out by the smooth jazz piping through the restaurant lobby. I handed my valet ticket to the attendant, tipped him a crisp $100 bill, and slid into the back of my waiting town car. "Home, please, Marcus," I told my driver. "Right away, Ms. Sterling," he replied, pulling smoothly into the city traffic. I leaned back against the plush leather seats, savoring the cool night air filtering through the cracked window. Step 1 of my spring cleaning was complete, but Beatrice and my mother were not the only parasites feeding off my supposed tragic demise. There was still the matter of my own apartment. 10 minutes later, the private elevator chimed as it opened directly into the foyer of my luxury penthouse. Even before the doors fully parted, I could feel the heavy rhythmic thumping of subwoofers vibrating through the floorboards. The scent of cheap stale beer and thick pungent cigar smoke assaulted my senses. I stepped out of the elevator, my cane completely forgotten, as I took in the absolute devastation of my home. My custom white marble countertops were littered with red plastic cups and half-eaten pizza boxes. A spilled, sticky crimson liquid was seeping into my imported Persian rug. The panoramic windows overlooking the city skyline were smudged with greasy handprints. Dozens of random strangers were dancing, spilling drinks, and treating my multi-million-dollar sanctuary like a cheap frat house. And right in the center of the chaos, draped across my pristine, cream-colored Italian velvet sofa, was Trey, my devoted, grieving fiancé. He was laughing loudly, blowing thick clouds of smoke toward my crystal chandelier. Curled up intimately against his side was Whitney, my supposed best friend and maid of honor, wearing my exclusive silk designer robe. She was feeding him a strawberry from a crystal bowl, giggling as he whispered something in her ear. I walked directly to the smart home control panel mounted on the hallway wall. I bypassed the complex settings, slammed my palm against the master override switch, and completely cut the power to the audio-visual system. The deafening club music died instantly. The sudden heavy silence in the massive room was absolute. A few drunken guests groaned in protest, but the complaints died in their throats the second they turned around and saw me standing under the entryway arch. I wore my emerald blazer like armor, my eyes fixed entirely on the velvet sofa. Trey choked on his cigar smoke. He shot up from the couch so fast he knocked over a glass of whiskey, sending the amber liquid soaking right into the delicate velvet cushions. His face drained of all color, his eyes bulging as if he had just seen a ghost. "Meredith," Trey gasped, his voice cracking violently. "Baby, what are you doing here? You are supposed to be at the long-term care facility." Whitney scrambled off the sofa, instinctively pulling my silk robe tighter around her body. She looked absolutely terrified. "Meredith, sweetie, we thought you were bedridden. We were just throwing a little gathering to keep our spirits up. We have been so depressed worrying about you." "Depressed?" I repeated, my tone as sharp as a razor blade. "Is that what you call smoking Cuban cigars on my $70,000 sofa while wearing my clothes?" "Baby, let me explain." Trey started taking a cautious step toward me with his hands raised defensively. "Beatrice told us your condition was terminal. She said the doctors gave you a week max. We were just celebrating your life, honoring your memory, you know. Honoring my memory by moving your side piece into my house before my obituary was even drafted," I replied coldly. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my smartphone, and tapped the clock application. I set the digital timer for exactly 1 minute. "You have exactly 60 seconds, I announced, raising my voice just enough so every single freeloader in the room could hear me. "To gather whatever garbage you brought into my home and get out. If you are still standing inside this penthouse when this alarm rings, I am pressing charges for breaking and entering, trespassing, and grand larceny." Trey let out a nervous laugh, trying to rely on his usual boyish charm. "Come on, Mayor. You are being dramatic. I live here. My name is on the guest registry downstairs." "Your name was removed from the registry the moment I woke up from surgery and checked the security cameras in my own home," I stated, tapping the screen to start the countdown. 50 seconds. Whitney began to hyperventilate. She rushed toward the hallway, slipping on a puddle of spilled beer. "Trey, get your shoes! She is crazy. She will actually call the cops." "I already did," I said, flashing them a brilliantly cold smile. 40 seconds. "And Whitney, take the robe off. Now." Humiliated, Whitney hastily stripped off the silk garment, throwing it onto a nearby chair, before sprinting toward the guest bedroom to grab her purse. The rest of the partygoers were already stampeding toward the exit, scrambling over each other to squeeze into the waiting elevator. Trey stood frozen in the center of the living room, staring at the ruined velvet sofa, then back at me. His arrogant facade finally shattered completely. "Meredith, please. I have nowhere to go. My credit cards are maxed out." 10 seconds, I said, holding the phone up. He did not wait for 0. He turned and bolted. He bolted toward the foyer, but the private elevator doors had already slid shut, taking the last of his freeloading friends down to the lobby. The digital floor indicator blinked, showing the car descending rapidly. He was trapped. Trey stood frozen in the entryway for a moment, staring at the brass elevator call button. Then slowly he turned back around to face me. The panic that had gripped him just seconds prior began to morph into something else. The boyish charm evaporated, replaced by a dark, ugly resentment. The mask was finally off. "You think this is funny?" he growled, his voice dropping an octave as he stepped back into the spacious living room. "You think you can just snap your fingers and kick me out onto the street like a stray dog? After everything I put up with. I leaned my weight onto my silver-handled cane, my expression entirely unreadable. "You mean living rent-free in a $10 million penthouse, driving a custom Tesla, and wearing designer watches bought with my supplementary credit card? Yes, Trey. Your suffering was truly unimaginable." He closed the distance between us, his broad shoulders squared, trying to use his 6'2" frame to tower over me. He stopped mere inches away, close enough that I could smell the stale whiskey and cheap cigar smoke clinging to his breath. His fists were clenched tight at his sides, the knuckles turning white. "I gave you the best years of my life," he hissed, his face flushing dark red. "You were always working, always obsessed with your design firm. I was the one keeping this relationship alive, and the second you get hurt, I am supposed to just pause my entire life to play nursemaid to a cripple. Do you have any idea what it was like for me, visiting that depressing rehab clinic, acting like I cared while you slept? I earned this penthouse. I earned that car. You owe me for the mental toll you put me through." He reached out suddenly, his heavy hand clamping down hard on my injured shoulder. His grip was bruising, intentionally painful. "You are not throwing me out, Meredith. I know your security codes. I know your bank pins. You are going to sit down, write me a very generous severance check, and hand over the keys to the Tesla. Otherwise, things are going to get very uncomfortable for you in your delicate condition." I did not scream. I did not flinch. I simply looked down at his hand gripping my blazer, then back up to his flushed, angry face. I marveled at how I had ever found this man attractive. The sheer entitlement radiating from him was nauseating. "You always were remarkably stupid, Trey," I said softly. I shifted my thumb over the curved silver handle of my cane. Built directly into the polished metal was a discreet, recessed panic button connected straight to my penthouse security system. A custom modification I had commissioned years ago for personal safety. I pressed it twice. A silent alarm immediately overrode the building network, unlocking the private service elevator in the back hallway and signaling the officers I had dispatched from the town car. "What did you just call me?" he demanded, his grip tightening as he raised his other hand, stepping fully into my personal space to intimidate me. "I called you stupid," I repeated, my voice steady and cold. "Because if you had paid any attention to my recovery, you would know I am not a cripple." In one swift, fluid motion, I brought the heavy, solid brass tip of my cane up and drove it directly into his instep. Trey let out a sharp howl of pain. He released my shoulder instantly, stumbling backward and clutching his foot. He crashed into the glass coffee table, sending empty beer bottles shattering across the marble floor. "You crazy witch!" he screamed, his face contorting with rage. He lunged forward, ready to strike back. "Freeze, hands in the air! Step away from the woman!" The command echoed like thunder through the penthouse. 4 uniformed police officers burst through the service corridor doors, their weapons drawn, and tactical flashlights cutting through the dim lighting of the living room. Trey froze mid-lunge, his eyes darting wildly between the officers and me. All the aggressive bravado vanished in an instant, replaced by sheer pathetic terror. He slowly raised his hands above his head, his knees practically knocking together. "Get on the ground now!" the lead officer barked, stepping forward and forcing Trey face down onto the spilled whiskey and broken glass. The sharp click of metal handcuffs snapping shut over Trey's wrists was the most beautiful sound I had heard all evening. "Officer, there is a misunderstanding," Trey babbled frantically, his cheek pressed against the cold floor. "I live here. I am her fiancé. We just had a little domestic dispute, that is all." "He is a trespasser," I corrected smoothly, brushing a piece of lint off the lapel of my emerald blazer. "He has no legal residence at this address. Furthermore, officer, he currently has the keys to my matte black Tesla Model S in his right jacket pocket, a vehicle he has been driving without my consent for the past 3 weeks. I reported it stolen to your precinct 30 minutes ago." The arresting officer patted Trey down, pulling the sleek key fob from his pocket and holding it up. "Well then, looks like we are adding grand theft auto to the breaking and entering charges." "No, no, Meredith, tell them." Trey thrashed violently against the officers, his voice cracking into a desperate sob. "It was a gift you gave me, that car. You cannot do this to me." Before I could respond, a piercing, hysterical scream ripped through the hallway. Whitney had finally emerged from the guest bedroom, fully dressed, but frantic. She took one look at Trey, pinned to the floor in handcuffs, and completely lost her mind. "Trey, oh my God, what are they doing to you?" Whitney shrieked, dropping her bags and falling to her knees, crying uncontrollably. She crawled toward the officers, her mascara running in thick black rivers down her cheeks. "Please, officer, let him go. He did nothing wrong. She is the monster. She planned this whole thing to ruin us. I walked over to where Whitney was kneeling, my cane tapping lightly against the floor. I looked down at my former best friend and my former fiancé, both sobbing pathetically in the wreckage of their own making. "Take him away," I told the officers, not breaking eye contact with Whitney. "And make sure this woman leaves the premises immediately, without my property." The heavy oak doors of the penthouse clicked shut, finally sealing away the chaotic remnants of my past life. The silence that washed over the massive apartment was intoxicating. I poured myself a glass of sparkling water, walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows, and watched the taillights of the police cruisers shrink into the distance. By 10 o'clock the next morning, I had already hired a private security firm, changed every digital lock on the premises, and frozen all joint credit accounts. I assumed my swift and brutal housecleaning would send the parasites scattering into the shadows to lick their wounds. I severely underestimated my sister's greed. At precisely noon, the private intercom near the kitchen island buzzed. It was Marcus, the building's head concierge. His voice was tense. He informed me that my sister was creating a massive scene in the grand lobby, threatening to call the press if she was not allowed upstairs immediately. More shockingly, she was not alone. She had brought Trey. I instructed Marcus to send them up. I wanted to see exactly how stupid they were willing to be. When the elevator doors parted, Beatrice stormed into my foyer like a conquering general. She wore a sharp crimson blazer, her face set in a mask of pure self-righteous fury. Behind her slinked Trey, looking significantly less arrogant than the night before. His designer clothes were rumpled from sleeping on a concrete holding cell bench, and he refused to make eye contact with me. "Bailing your sister's cheating fiancé out of jail is a rather unconventional family bonding activity, Beatrice," I said, leaning casually against the marble kitchen island. "I assume you used the leftover funds from your fraudulent GoFundMe campaign to cover his bond." Beatrice did not take the bait. Instead of launching into her usual hysterical defense, she marched straight to the newly cleaned glass coffee table and slammed a thick manila legal folder down onto the surface. "I am done playing your sick little games, Meredith," Beatrice announced, her voice trembling with cold, calculated rage. "You want to humiliate me in front of the entire family? You want to send the police after the man who spent months agonizing over your hospital bed? Fine, but you are not walking away with everything." I picked up the heavy folder, flipping open the cover. The legal jargon was dense, but the bold capitalized header at the very top of the document was impossible to miss. "Petition for emergency conservatorship." I let out a harsh laugh, dropping the papers back onto the table. "A conservatorship? Are you entirely out of your mind?" "No, but you clearly are," Beatrice snapped, crossing her arms over her chest. "Look at your behavior over the last 24 hours. You discharged yourself from a medical facility against doctor recommendations. You assaulted your loving fiancé with a weapon. You are displaying textbook symptoms of severe paranoia, erratic financial decisions, and aggressive delusions. My lawyer assures me that the anesthesia from your surgery combined with the psychological trauma of your accident has rendered you completely mentally unfit." Trey finally found his voice, stepping out from behind my sister to point an accusing finger at me. "You are unstable, Meredith. You kicked me out onto the street for no reason. You had me arrested over a simple misunderstanding about a car you bought for me. The judge is going to take one look at your insane actions and hand full legal control straight to your family." I stared at the two of them, genuinely marveling at the sheer audacity of their delusion. Beatrice was not just trying to save face anymore. She was making a desperate nuclear play for my entire $2 million estate, my investment portfolios, and the controlling shares of my design firm. She intended to strip away my fundamental human rights and treat me like an incapacitated ward of the state, all so she could finally hold the purse strings she believed she deserved. "Let me make sure I understand this," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerously calm whisper. "You embezzled $15,000 from my business. You ordered a do not resuscitate directive on me while I was unconscious. You broke into my home and defiled it. And now, to avoid facing the legal consequences of your own catastrophic failures, you are trying to declare me legally insane. We are protecting you from yourself. Beatrice countered smoothly, adopting that terrifying fake maternal tone she used the night before. The petition has already been filed with the probate court. Until the judge makes a ruling, your assets are going to be temporarily frozen. You cannot sell the firm, and you certainly cannot cut me or mother out of the will. We are taking the wheel now, sweetie. I looked down at the signature line on the petition. It belonged to Richard Vance, a notoriously sleazy probate attorney known for taking desperate cases on contingency. Beatrice had found a bottom feeder willing to entertain her delusions. "You have made a catastrophic miscalculation, Beatrice," I said, stepping away from the island and walking right up to her. I did not need my cane today. I stood tall, forcing her to look me directly in the eye. "You think you can trap me in a legal cage, but all you have done is hand me the keys to absolutely destroy you in a public courtroom. You wanted a war over my estate, you have one, but when the dust settles, you will not even have the bus fare to get back to our mother's house." I turned back to the intercom panel and pressed the button for the front desk. "Marcus," I said clearly, "my guests are leaving. If they ever set foot in this building again, do not call me. Call the police." Less than 2 hours later, a sharp knock echoed through my foyer. Marcus had allowed a licensed process server up to the penthouse. The man handed me a thick manila envelope, mumbled a quick apology, and hurried back to the elevator. I carried the heavy packet into my kitchen, broke the seal, and slid the official court documents onto the marble counter. I read through Richard Vance's legal filings. He used terms like mentally incapacitated danger to herself and fiduciary irresponsibility. Beatrice was officially asking the judge to freeze my personal bank accounts, seize control of my business assets, and grant her immediate power of attorney over my medical and financial decisions. It was a terrifying legal weapon designed to strip a person of their autonomy. Most people would have panicked. Most people would have broken down in tears, terrified of the looming court battle and the prospect of losing their freedom. I just smiled. Beatrice had always fundamentally misunderstood what I did for a living. Because my company was named Sterling Design and Consulting, my family naturally assumed I spent my days picking out color palettes, arranging office furniture, and drafting floor plans for corporate lobbies. I never bothered to correct them. In reality, I designed secure financial infrastructures. I was a certified forensic accountant and a senior fraud investigator. Corporations hired my firm to dismantle embezzlers, trace missing funds through complex offshore networks, and prepare bulletproof dossiers for federal prosecutors. Beatrice had just challenged a financial sniper to a gunfight. I left the court papers on the kitchen island and walked down the hall to my home office. I bypassed the standard security lock with my fingerprint and stepped into the dimly lit room. My workspace was dominated by a massive custom-built desk holding 4 curved high-resolution monitors. I sat down in my ergonomic leather chair, booted up my encrypted servers, and cracked my knuckles. It was time to go hunting. I started with Beatrice and my brother-in-law Carter. Carter was a mid-level real estate developer who loved to brag about his golf handicap and his leased luxury SUVs at family holidays. He always treated me like a naive little girl who played at running a business. I opened my proprietary skip tracing software and began pulling their public tax records, property deeds, and registered LLCs. Within 45 minutes, I had entirely mapped out their pathetic financial reality. Carter was not a successful developer. He was drowning in toxic debt. He had leveraged their primary residence to the breaking point, taking out 3 separate high-interest equity loans just to keep their country club memberships active. I dug deeper into the commercial database, running searches on universal commercial code filings. I traced the shell company Beatrice had used for the fake medical fund and found it was linked to a commercial bank account currently facing a massive overdraft penalty. They were not just greedy, they were desperate. Their entire upper-class lifestyle was less than 30 days away from total collapse. My fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard. I took screenshots, downloaded public court filings for Carter's unpaid contractor disputes, and saved everything into a secure folder labeled Exhibit A. The picture was becoming crystal clear. Beatrice did not just want my $2 million estate out of spite. She needed my money to save her husband from declaring bankruptcy and facing potential wire fraud charges for his own shady business dealings. Next, I turned my attention to our mother, the woman who had stood in the restaurant and boldly defended my sister's criminal actions. The woman who had willingly signed a sworn affidavit attached to the conservatorship petition, testifying under penalty of perjury that I was suffering from severe psychological delusions. I logged into a specialized legal database used by financial institutions to verify asset histories. I pulled up my mother's primary residence, the sprawling suburban estate she had inherited when my father passed away. A glaring red flag immediately popped up on my third monitor. According to the county clerk's office, a new massive lien had been placed against the property just 6 months ago. I traced the origination of the loan. My mother had quietly taken out a reverse mortgage, bleeding the family equity dry. But where had the money gone? I cross-referenced the dates with Carter's business filings. There it was. A massive untaxed wire transfer from my mother's personal account directly into Carter's failing real estate firm. She had secretly liquidated her own retirement security to bail out her golden child's husband, and they had already burned through every single penny. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the glowing screens. The absolute audacity of their plan was staggering. They had drained their own accounts, ruined their own credit, and were now utilizing the court system to steal my assets to cover their catastrophic failures. They wanted to stand in front of a probate judge and paint me as a reckless, unstable woman, incapable of managing a checkbook. I clicked a button, sending the massive digital dossier to my high-speed laser printer. The machine hummed to life, churning out page after page of undeniable hard evidence. Bank statements, property liens, corporate registry data, and wire transfer receipts all piled up perfectly. They wanted a legal war over my estate. I was going to give them an execution. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise, fueled by black coffee and absolute clarity. The preliminary dossier I had printed the night before was just the surface. To legally obliterate a conservatorship petition, I needed to prove that the person asking to manage my finances was completely incapable of managing their own. I sat back down in my ergonomic chair, woke up my monitors, and initiated a full-scale financial autopsy on Beatrice. My sister spent her entire adult life curating an image of flawless suburban wealth. Her social media feeds were an endless parade of catered garden parties, unboxing videos of seasonal designer handbags, and staged family portraits in front of her massive 6-bedroom colonial estate. She viewed poverty as a moral failing and constantly lectured our extended family on the importance of generational wealth, looking down her nose at anyone who rented an apartment or drove a domestic vehicle. I opened a split screen. On the left monitor, I loaded Beatrice's public Instagram profile, currently displaying a freshly uploaded photo of her sipping a mimosa at the local country club with a caption boasting about her blessed life. On the right monitor, I accessed the LexisNexis public records database and pulled the complete property history of her beloved colonial mansion. The contrast between the two screens was poetic. The first mortgage was standard. 10 years ago, Beatrice and Carter bought the house for $1.2 million, putting down a minimal down payment, subsidized by a quiet loan from our mother. For a few years, they managed the standard monthly installments. But the illusion of extreme wealth requires constant, aggressive financial maintenance. I traced the origins of the second loan. 5 years ago, Beatrice opened a massive home equity line of credit. The withdrawal history, which I pulled through a secured credit reporting terminal, was a roadmap of sheer vanity. $40,000 drained for a custom kitchen renovation right before she hosted her annual Thanksgiving gala. $60,000 wired to a luxury car dealership so she could upgrade her imported SUV to the latest model. Another $30,000 siphoned out to pay for her daughter's exclusive private school tuition because Carter's real estate commissions had suddenly and permanently dried up. They had treated their home equity like a limitless cash machine, financing a champagne lifestyle on a tap water budget. But the third mortgage was where the desperation truly showed. I cross-referenced the property deed with a specialized registry of subprime lenders. 18 months ago, their primary bank had clearly cut them off. Drowning in credit card debt and unable to service the first two loans, Beatrice and Carter had turned to a predatory high-interest private lending firm based out of Nevada. They took out a third mortgage, a brutal balloon payment structure that required them to pay back the principal in one massive lump sum alongside exorbitant monthly interest fees. I clicked through the amortization schedule, my eyes scanning the rows of numbers, until I hit the current fiscal quarter. The balloon payment had officially come due exactly 4 weeks ago. The exact same week I was admitted to the hospital for my orthopedic surgery. The timing was beautifully horrific. I opened the county clerk's digital filing system and ran a search for pending litigation against Beatrice's address. It took less than 30 seconds for the system to generate a hit. It was a notice of default formally filed by the private lending firm's aggressively litigious legal team. Beatrice and Carter were officially in pre-foreclosure. According to the strictly mandated timeline of state property laws, they had exactly 90 days to produce $400,000 in cash. If they failed to clear the defaulted balloon payment by the deadline, the bank would legally seize the colonial mansion, auction it off on the courthouse steps, and forcefully evict them with the county sheriff. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the desk, staring at the digital foreclosure notice glowing on my screen. Everything suddenly made perfect, terrifying sense. Beatrice's sudden suffocating interest in my medical care, her aggressive push to ban visitors and isolate me in a recovery ward, the fraudulent GoFundMe dinner to scrape together quick cash, the horrific "do not resuscitate" order she tried to place on my file while I was under anesthesia, and now the desperate, sloppy petition for an emergency conservatorship. This was never about her mental health advocacy or her concern for my well-being. It was about raw, unfiltered survival. If Beatrice could convince a judge that I was legally incompetent, she would gain immediate executive control over my $2 million estate. She would use my hard-earned assets to pay off her predatory third mortgage, save her beloved colonial mansion from the auction block, and preserve her fake country club lifestyle. She was willing to strip away my fundamental human rights and lock me in a legal cage just to avoid the humiliation of moving her family into a small rental apartment. I selected the notice of default and hit print. The heavy laser printer hummed, spitting out the official document that proved my sister was entirely bankrupt. Beatrice wanted to stand in a courtroom and argue that I was financially reckless. I was going to let her take the stand, swear under oath, and then hand the judge the exact date her own house was scheduled to be repossessed. With Beatrice's financial ruin fully documented and securely backed up to an encrypted cloud server, I created a new folder on my desktop. I typed the name Exhibit B and pressed Enter. It was time to dissect the man who had slept on my velvet sofa, smoked cheap cigars in my living room, and boldly claimed he had somehow earned my $10 million penthouse. Trey. From the day we met at a charity gala 2 years ago, Trey had aggressively marketed himself as a visionary digital asset manager. He carried business cards printed on heavy matte black cardstock that simply read Web3 Solutions and Decentralized Wealth. At family dinners, he would dominate the conversation loudly, bragging about his proprietary trading algorithms and his massive returns on obscure cryptocurrency tokens. He wore limited edition luxury watches and exclusively wore tailored Italian suits. But as I had reminded him the night before I bought the watches, I bought the suits, and I certainly bought the matte black Tesla he loved to parade around town. If Trey was genuinely a self-made crypto millionaire, he was doing a spectacular job of hiding his wealth from the woman he was supposed to marry. I opened my specialized blockchain analysis software. It was an enterprise-grade tool my firm used to track illicit money laundering through cryptocurrency networks. It allowed me to trace anonymous wallet addresses across multiple decentralized ledgers. I started by pulling the corporate registration for his primary company, Apex Digital Holdings, LLC. The public corporate registry listed a virtual office space in a downtown commercial building as his headquarters. That was red flag number 1. I ran a deep background search on the LLC's tax identification number. Red flag number 2 appeared instantly. Apex Digital Holdings had never filed a corporate tax return, not a single one in the 3 years since its incorporation. But the real truth, the undeniable, irrefutable reality of Trey's fake empire, lived on the blockchain. I pulled out my phone and scrolled back through my text messages with Trey, finding a conversation from 8 months ago, where he had casually sent me his public crypto wallet address, practically begging me to invest $250,000 of my firm's capital into his guaranteed high-yield liquidity pool. I had politely declined at the time, citing a conflict of interest. Now I copied that alphanumeric address and pasted it directly into my forensic tracker. The digital map exploded across my center monitor, displaying a complex, sprawling web of transactions. Most people look at a blockchain ledger and see nothing but random strings of letters and numbers. A forensic accountant looks at it and sees a story, and Trey's story was a textbook financial tragedy. He did not have a proprietary trading algorithm. He was not yielding massive returns on decentralized exchanges. Trey was running a classic aggressive Ponzi scheme. I traced the flow of capital over the last 24 months. The pattern was glaringly obvious. When a new investor wired money into Apex Digital Holdings, Trey immediately transferred those funds into his primary crypto wallet. But instead of deploying that capital into legitimate digital assets or trading platforms, he immediately fractioned the money. 60% of the new deposit was immediately routed right back out to pay the supposed monthly dividends of his earlier investors, keeping them happy and quiet. The remaining 40% was funneled through a cryptocurrency tumbler to mask the origin before ultimately landing in an offshore fiat account to fund his lavish lifestyle. He was robbing Peter to pay Paul, utilizing the volatile and unregulated nature of cryptocurrency to mask the fact that there was absolutely no actual profit being generated. I ran a predictive algorithm on his current liquidity pool. The numbers were catastrophic. Over the past 3 months, the influx of new investors had completely dried up. Without fresh capital entering the top of the funnel, Trey had no way to pay the promised returns to his older clients. His primary wallet balance was bleeding out fast. I checked the exact numerical value. He had less than $12,000 left in total liquidity. His investors, who collectively believed they were holding over $4 million in digital assets, were going to wake up in a matter of weeks and realize their money was entirely gone. Trey was not just a cheating, arrogant opportunist who wanted to leech off my estate. He was a desperate, cornered criminal actively running from a massive federal fraud charge. If the Securities and Exchange Commission even caught a glimpse of this ledger, Trey would not just be facing an eviction. He would be facing 20 years in a federal penitentiary. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the glowing web of illicit transactions. A cold, predatory smile crept across my face. Trey had threatened me in my own home. He had told me things would get very uncomfortable for me. He had no idea what discomfort truly looked like. I exported the entire blockchain map, generated a comprehensive forensic report detailing every single fraudulent transaction, and saved the 50-page PDF into Exhibit B. I did not even need to file a civil suit against him. All I had to do was package this neat little dossier and anonymously mail it to the Financial Crimes Division of the FBI. But first I needed to make sure Beatrice's ridiculous conservatorship hearing went exactly according to my plan. The puzzle pieces were assembling perfectly, but one glaring question remained. Why did Beatrice bail Trey out of jail? My sister was fundamentally selfish. She would never spend $10,000 in non-refundable bail bonds on a man who had just been publicly arrested unless that man was holding something she desperately needed. I turned my attention back to the center monitor, bringing up the master ledger for Trey's Apex Digital Holdings. I filtered the incoming fiat deposits, searching for any transaction originating from Beatrice or Carter. For 10 minutes, the screen showed nothing. No direct transfers from their joint accounts. No wires from their failing LLC. I frowned, adjusting my search parameters. If Beatrice was 90 days away from a foreclosure on her beloved colonial mansion, she would have needed a miracle. Trey was a salesman who specialized in selling financial miracles. I expanded the search history to cover the exact week Beatrice's predatory third mortgage balloon payment became officially delinquent. The ledger refreshed. A single massive transaction populated the screen. An incoming domestic wire transfer for exactly $150,000. I leaned closer to the monitor, my eyes scanning the origin routing number attached to the wire. It was not a standard commercial bank code. It was a private wealth management routing prefix. I quickly copy-pasted the 9-digit sequence into my firm's secure institutional database, cross-referencing it with my own family's financial records. The result flashed on the screen, and the sheer audacity of the betrayal actually made me laugh out loud in the empty office. The source of the funds was the Sterling Family Generation Skipping Trust. It was an ironclad, irrevocable trust, established by our late grandfather. The money was legally quarantined, strictly meant to be distributed only when the designated beneficiaries reached the age of 35. Those beneficiaries were me and Whitney. My grandfather had taken Whitney in when her parents passed away, raising my former best friend as a member of the family, and ensuring her future was secure alongside mine. Beatrice, being a decade older, had received her inheritance years ago and burned through it. However, because our mother was the primary executor of the trust, Beatrice had proximity to the accounts. I opened a secure portal to the trust's management dashboard, bypassing the security protocols, using my credentials as a named beneficiary. I pulled the withdrawal authorization forms from 6 months ago. There, glowing on my screen, was a forged digital signature bearing my mother's name authorizing the emergency liquidation of $150,000 in blue-chip stocks. The entire pathetic conspiracy unraveled before my eyes. 6 months ago, Beatrice was backed into a corner. The private lending firm was demanding their massive balloon payment. She was completely broke, drowning in credit card debt, and terrified of losing her upper-class suburban facade. In her desperation, she turned to the smooth-talking fiancé of her little sister. Trey must have pitched her the ultimate Web3 salvation. He likely promised her that if she could provide a massive influx of temporary capital, his proprietary trading algorithm would triple the money in a matter of weeks. Beatrice saw a guaranteed way to pay off her predatory mortgage and keep her mansion. So she committed federal wire fraud. She manipulated our mother's credentials illegally, drained the funds meant for my future and Whitney's future, and wired the stolen money directly into Trey's Ponzi scheme. But Beatrice was completely economically illiterate. She honestly believed Trey was a crypto genius. She had no idea she had just handed $150,000 to a professional scam artist. I tracked what Trey did with the trust money the exact second it hit his account. He did not invest a single penny of it. The ledger showed him immediately fracturing the deposit, using $80,000 to pay off a group of furious early investors who were threatening to sue him. He used another $40,000 to cover his massive luxury penthouse association fees and his custom tailor bills. The rest vanished into an offshore fiat account to fund the lavish lifestyle he paraded around in front of me. This was exactly why Beatrice had bailed him out of the police precinct. She still believed the money was safely compounding in a digital vault. She thought Trey was the key to saving her home. She was desperately protecting him because she needed him to withdraw the funds. She had no idea he was completely bankrupt and the money she had stolen from my trust was already gone forever. The implications were staggering. Beatrice was not just facing a humiliating bank foreclosure. By illegally draining an irrevocable trust, she had committed a major federal offense. She was a fiduciary criminal. I clicked the print button. The laser printer roared to life once again, spitting out the forged authorization forms, the trust withdrawal receipts, and the irrefutable blockchain ledger proving exactly where the stolen money had gone. I gathered the warm pages, aligned their edges perfectly, and placed them into a new folder. Exhibit C. I looked at the 3 thick manila folders sitting on my desk. They contained the absolute destruction of my sister, my former fiancé, and my backstabbing best friend. Beatrice wanted to drag me into a probate courtroom tomorrow morning and declare me mentally unfit to manage my own life. I was going to let her take the stand, and then I was going to bury her alive in federal evidence. But handing those folders to the federal authorities right this second would be a mercy. A swift arrest would bring the FBI crashing down, freezing all their assets and outsourcing the satisfying crunch of personal consequence to faceless government bureaucrats. If Beatrice and Trey went straight to federal prison tonight, the banks would quietly seize their properties. The story would end in a sterile government office. I did not want the banks to take their homes. I wanted to take them myself. I needed to own the battlefield before the first shot was even fired in that probate courtroom. I turned my attention away from the criminal evidence and focused entirely on the civil side of their financial ruin. My mother was the linchpin. She had willingly signed a sworn affidavit claiming I was insane, all to protect the golden child who had secretly bankrupted her. She had taken out a massive high-interest reverse mortgage on our childhood estate to fund Carter's failing business. That specific debt was currently held by a mid-tier investment bank in Chicago, an institution notorious for offloading toxic high-risk residential loans at a steep discount just to avoid carrying them on their quarterly balance sheets. I opened a secure encrypted terminal on my desktop and routed an urgent request to my registered corporate agent in Delaware. Within 45 minutes, a brand new completely anonymous limited liability company was legally incorporated under the name Obsidian Holdings LLC. There was no public trace, no digital footprint connecting the entity to Meredith Sterling. As far as the financial world was concerned, Obsidian Holdings was just another aggressive private equity firm looking to swallow up distressed assets. I immediately funded the new entity with $3 million of clean liquid capital transferred straight from my design firm's corporate reserve accounts. While my family genuinely believed my business was bankrupt, the reality was that my proprietary financial software had generated over $12 million in pure profit during the last fiscal year alone. $3 million was a drop in the bucket to secure my ultimate leverage. I picked up my secure office phone and dialed the direct line for the Chicago Bank's Distressed Asset Division. When the senior portfolio manager answered, I did not introduce myself as a grieving daughter or a wronged sister. I spoke in the clipped authoritative tone of a chief executive. I told him Obsidian Holdings was interested in purchasing a specific bundle of high-risk suburban residential liens, strategically listing a few random properties before casually slipping in the exact parcel number for my mother's estate. The manager was practically salivating over the phone. My mother's reverse mortgage was a ticking time bomb for their firm. It was severely over-leveraged, tied to an elderly borrower with zero liquid assets, and legally messy. I offered to buy the paper for 80 cents on the dollar completely in cash, provided the transfer was executed by the end of the business day. He agreed instantly, rushing the paperwork through his legal department with dizzying speed. An hour later, a heavy digital contract arrived in my secure inbox. I reviewed the terms, applied my anonymous corporate digital signature, and authorized the wire transfer. The progress bar on my monitor filled slowly, glowing green and steady against the dark screen until the final confirmation flashed. The funds had cleared. The legal ramifications of that single digital handshake were absolute. The Chicago Bank was officially removed from the equation. Obsidian Holdings was now the sole owner of the massive lien against my mother's sprawling suburban estate. I sat back in my leather chair, letting the magnitude of the moment wash over me. I was no longer just her scapegoat daughter. I was no longer the punching bag she could dismiss and belittle at family dinners. I was legally her bank. I was her primary creditor. I held the deed to the roof over her head. My mother had drained her entire life savings to bail out Beatrice. She had absolutely no income left. The monthly interest payments on that massive lien were staggering, and according to the strict terms of the original loan contract I now owned, a single missed payment gave the creditor the immediate incontestable right to initiate foreclosure proceedings and evict the resident. I logged into the servicing portal the Chicago bank had just transferred over to my LLC. The timing was almost too poetic to be real. My mother's next massive interest payment was due in exactly 48 hours. She did not have the money. She was entirely banking on Beatrice winning the emergency conservatorship tomorrow morning so they could raid my estate and use my money to cover her bill. The trap was set perfectly primed and completely inescapable. They were walking into the probate courthouse tomorrow, believing they held all the power. They thought they were going to legally strip me of my wealth and patch the gaping holes in their sinking ships. They had no idea the ships had already sunk, and I was the one holding the deed to the ocean floor. I neatly stacked the 3 evidence folders, slid them into my leather briefcase, and turned off my monitors. Tomorrow was going to be a very educational day for the Sterling family. I pulled the thick stacks of paper from my leather briefcase and slid them into 3 heavy blood-red legal folders. Exhibit A. The absolute proof of Beatrice's impending foreclosure and complete bankruptcy. Exhibit B. The undeniable blockchain evidence of Trey's collapsing cryptocurrency Ponzi scheme. Exhibit C. The forged authorization documents proving Beatrice committed fiduciary fraud to fund Trey's desperate scam. These were not just defense documents anymore. They were loaded weapons primed and ready to be discharged. I picked up my smartphone and dialed the direct line to my personal attorney, Arthur Kaplan. Kaplan was a senior managing partner at one of the most ruthless corporate litigation firms on the East Coast. He normally handled my firm's massive corporate contracts, but he was an apex predator who thrived on destroying hostile takeovers. This entire situation was nothing more than a hostile takeover of my personal life. "Good morning, Meredith." Kaplan's deep, gravelly voice echoed through the speaker. "I reviewed the emergency conservatorship petition Richard Vance filed against you yesterday afternoon. It is an absolute joke. It is full of hearsay, procedural errors, and blatant lies. We can have it dismissed by the judge in 10 minutes with a single phone call." "We are not going to court, Arthur," I replied, running my hand over the smooth, glossy cover of the first red folder. "Dismissing the petition just sends them back to the drawing board and allows them to hide behind the legal system. I want to end this permanently. Call Richard Vance right now. Tell him the stress of the looming legal battle is taking a severe toll on my physical recovery. Tell him I am terrified of the public humiliation. Tell him I am willing to surrender the conservatorship and negotiate a peaceful transfer of my assets, provided we do it privately at your office this afternoon." Kaplan chuckled, a low, predatory sound that rumbled through the phone. "A fake surrender. You want them to walk into the slaughterhouse believing they are the butchers." "Exactly. Tell Vance to bring his client, and make sure Beatrice brings her husband as well as her little emotional support animal, Whitney. I want all of them in one room when the hammer drops." "I will draft the fake settlement paperwork immediately," Kaplan said, the excitement evident in his sharp tone. "I will have my assistants prepare the main conference room. See you at 2 o'clock, Meredith." The bait was cast, and just as I predicted, they swallowed it whole. Less than an hour later, my home security system pinged my phone with an alert. I opened the live feed from the hidden exterior camera I had discreetly installed outside Beatrice's colonial mansion years ago, back when I actually cared about her safety. The high-definition audio was crystal clear. Beatrice was standing on her manicured front porch, practically vibrating with triumphant energy. She held a bottle of expensive vintage champagne, popping the cork and pouring overflowing glasses for Trey and Whitney, who were standing beside her. "I told you she would crack," Beatrice bragged loudly, taking a massive gulp of the sparkling wine. Meredith always was weak under real pressure. The second she realized a judge was going to publicly declare her insane and strip her of her precious independence, she folded. She is terrified of the humiliation. Whitney giggled, leaning heavily against Trey's side. "Does this mean we get the penthouse back today? My designer clothes are still locked in the guest bedroom. You get the penthouse, I get the investment portfolios, and Carter gets the liquid cash," Beatrice declared, her eyes gleaming with unfiltered, greedy anticipation. "We won. We beat the little financial genius at her own game." I watched the live feed as Trey wrapped his arm around Whitney, his arrogant, boyish smirk fully restored. He genuinely believed his massive problems were solved. He thought my hard-earned money was going to refill his empty liquidity pool and keep the federal agents off his back. They clinked their crystal glasses together, toasting to my absolute destruction, completely unaware they were cheerfully celebrating their own funeral. At 1:45, my driver pulled up to Kaplan's downtown law firm. The firm occupied the top 3 floors of a towering glass skyscraper projecting an aura of cold, unyielding power. I walked past the marble reception desk and straight into the primary conference room. It was a massive, intimidating space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the financial district centered around a sleek mahogany table. I took the leather executive chair at the very head of the table. I arranged the 3 blood-red folders in a perfect equidistant row in front of me. I did not open them. I just sat perfectly still, my posture straight, waiting. At precisely 2 o'clock, the heavy, frosted glass doors of the conference room swung open. Beatrice strutted in first, wearing a designer power suit she definitely could not afford, her chin held high with supreme arrogance. Richard Vance, her sleazy attorney, followed closely behind, clutching a cheap leather briefcase. Then came Trey, trying to look intimidating, but failing to hide the desperate greed in his eyes, with Whitney clinging to his arm like a decorative accessory. They stopped at the opposite end of the long mahogany table. Beatrice looked down the length of the room at me, taking in my calm demeanor, and the 3 red folders resting silently in front of me. She offered a fake, condescending smile. "I am so glad you finally saw reason, Meredith," Beatrice said, her voice dripping with fake pity. "This is for your own good. We are going to take wonderful care of your money." The double-glass doors of Sterling and Vance Associates glided open, revealing a panoramic view of the Chicago skyline. I stepped into the sprawling conference room, my heels sinking into the plush carpeting. A massive mahogany table dominated the space, polished to a mirror finish that reflected the harsh fluorescent lights above. Sitting on the far side, arrayed like a tribunal waiting to pass judgment, were my mother, Beatrice, my sister, Whitney, and my brother-in-law, Trey. Trey sat with his arms crossed tightly over his tailored suit, a smug expression plastered across his face, as if he had already won the lottery. Whitney was busy examining her flawless manicure, looking entirely bored by my arrival. Beatrice sat dead center, her posture perfectly rigid. She wore her signature pearl necklace and a tight, calculated smile that did not reach her eyes. I took the single empty chair facing them. No one offered a greeting. No one asked how my recovery was progressing. The thick stack of legal documents resting under Beatrice's manicured hands told me everything I needed to know about the true nature of this meeting. The silence stretched heavy and deliberate. They expected me to squirm to apologize for being late, or to ask why I had been summoned to this high-rise law firm under the guise of reviewing our late father's minor trust distributions. I refused to give them the satisfaction. I simply folded my hands on the cool wood of the table and waited. Trey finally broke the silence, leaning forward with a patronizing smirk. He adjusted his silk tie and let out a short, mocking breath. "We are doing this for your own good, you know. You clearly cannot manage your own affairs anymore. That accident took a severe toll on your cognitive functions." Whitney finally looked up from her nails, her eyes gleaming with barely concealed triumph. "It is actually incredibly sad," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sympathy. "You living alone, struggling with your obvious mental decline. Mom has been losing sleep worrying about how you are squandering your resources." Beatrice placed her hands flat on the table and pushed a thick manila folder across the smooth mahogany surface. The heavy packet slid to a halt exactly 2 inches from my folded hands. Bold black letters on the cover page spelled out the reality of their ambush petition for conservatorship. My mother tilted her head, her smile turning sickeningly sweet. "Just sign it, honey," Beatrice said, tapping her manicured index finger against the wood. "Your brain is damaged. Let Mommy handle the money." The sheer audacity of her statement hung in the sterile air of the conference room. A conservatorship. They were actively trying to declare me legally incompetent. They wanted to seize total control of my bank accounts, my real estate, and the digital marketing firm I had secretly built into a multi-million-dollar enterprise over the last 5 years. They honestly believed the minor concussion I had sustained in a fender bender 3 weeks ago was their golden ticket to my bank vault. I looked down at the printed documents, then back up at the three of them. They looked so incredibly confident, so utterly convinced of their own superiority and my supposed weakness. Trey reached into his breast pocket and produced a heavy silver pen, tossing it onto the documents with a loud clatter. "Sign on the dotted lines," Trey ordered, his voice taking on a harsh, demanding edge. "The judge has already reviewed the preliminary medical statements we submitted. Do not make this an ugly legal battle. You will lose." I did not reach for the pen. Instead, I leaned back in my leather chair, maintaining direct eye contact with my mother. "You submitted medical statements," I repeated, keeping my voice dangerously calm. "From which doctor exactly?" Beatrice waved a dismissive hand, irritated that I was not immediately bursting into tears. "Dr. Evans, of course. He has been our family physician for decades. He reviewed your emergency room records and fully agreed that your erratic behavior, combined with your recent head trauma, makes you entirely unfit to handle your substantial savings. Which, frankly, we were absolutely shocked to discover you had been hiding from your own family." So, that was it. They had somehow discovered the balance of my primary investment account. They smelled money and immediately devised a plot to strip away my autonomy to get their hands on it. Whitney scoffed, crossing her arms. "It is completely selfish of you to hoard that kind of wealth while I am trying to buy a house in the Hamptons. You cannot even manage a simple budget with your brain fog. We are stepping in to protect the family assets from your incompetence." I let my gaze slowly travel from Trey's arrogant smirk to Whitney's greedy glare, and finally to Beatrice's cold, calculating eyes. They had trapped me in a high-rise tower, armed with fraudulent medical opinions and a stack of legal papers designed to erase my freedom. They expected me to break. They expected me to cry and sign my life away to earn their scraps of conditional affection. I picked up the heavy silver pen Trey had thrown at me. The cool metal felt grounding against my skin. Trey leaned forward, a greedy glint in his eyes, while Whitney stopped pretending to care about her nails and stared openly at the paper. Beatrice offered a tight, victorious nod. They thought they had won. They thought my silence was submission. Instead of uncapping the pen, I casually flipped it end over end, then tossed it completely off the mahogany table. It hit the floor with a sharp, dismissive clatter that echoed through the massive room. "I am not signing a single thing," I said, my voice steady, slicing through the sterile air of the conference room. Beatrice narrowed her eyes, the fake motherly warmth instantly evaporating. "Do not be a stubborn child, Meredith. We have a judge on standby. We can do this the easy way, or we can drag you into a courtroom and publicly strip you of your rights. You will not be dragging anyone anywhere," a deep, authoritative voice boomed from the doorway. The heavy glass doors swung open and Mr. Kaplan strode into the room. Arthur Kaplan was not just any lawyer. He was a senior partner at Vanguard and Hayes, the most ruthless corporate litigation firm in Chicago. His tailored charcoal suit and silver hair exuded a level of power that made Trey's flashy designer outfit look like a cheap Halloween costume. Mr. Kaplan walked over and stood directly behind my chair, placing his battered leather briefcase on the table with a heavy thud. Trey stood up, his face flushing with anger. "Who the hell are you? This is a private family legal matter. You need to leave before I call security." "Mr." Kaplan ignored Trey entirely. He calmly clicked open the brass latches of his briefcase. "My name is Arthur Kaplan, and I represent Meredith in all personal, financial, and medical legalities. And as of this morning, I also represent the estate of your late father." Beatrice gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles turning white. "That is impossible. We use Sterling and Vance for the family trust. You have no jurisdiction here." "I recently moved my assets," I interjected smoothly, leaning back and crossing my arms. "And as the primary beneficiary of Dad's actual estate, I have the authority to appoint new counsel. But we are not here to discuss my bank accounts. We are here to discuss your medical decisions, Mother. Mr. Kaplan withdrew a single piece of paper from his briefcase. It was not a thick stack of legalese. It was a standard, brightly colored hospital form. He slid it across the polished mahogany, mirroring the exact gesture Beatrice had used moments ago. The paper came to a halt right on top of her conservatorship petition. Beatrice looked down. The color drained from her face so rapidly, I thought she might actually faint. Whitney leaned over to look, her brow furrowing in confusion. "What is that?" Whitney asked, her voice losing its arrogant edge. "That," Mr. Kaplan said, his voice ringing with absolute authority, "is a do not resuscitate order. Signed by Beatrice 3 weeks ago, on the night Meredith was admitted to the emergency room for a minor concussion." The room fell deathly silent. Trey sank back into his chair, his mouth hanging slightly open. "You were my emergency contact," I said, staring directly into my mother's terrified eyes. "When I arrived at the hospital, I was unconscious for exactly 20 minutes due to a minor head bump. The doctors called you to authorize standard observation. Instead, you rushed to the hospital and immediately signed a DNR. You told the attending physician I had a history of severe aneurysms, a complete fabrication, and instructed them to withhold all life-saving measures if my heart rate dropped. I was panicked." Beatrice stammered, her voice shaking. "I did not understand what I was signing. I was a terrified mother." "You understood perfectly," Mr. Kaplan countered, pulling out a second document. "This is a transcript of your phone call to your wealth manager placed directly from the hospital waiting room 10 minutes after you signed the DNR. You asked him to calculate the exact tax implications of inheriting Meredith's estate if she were to pass away before morning." Whitney gasped, pulling away from Beatrice as if she were suddenly contagious. "Mom, is that true?" Mr. Kaplan did not give them time to recover. He placed his hands firmly on the table and leaned toward the trio. "In the state of Illinois, as well as under the specific clauses written into your late husband's trust, there is a legal doctrine known as the Slayer statute." Trey scoffed nervously. "The Slayer statute is for murderers. Nobody killed anyone." "The statute," Mr. Kaplan corrected, "sharply applies to anyone who intentionally causes or attempts to hasten the death of a family member for financial gain. By deliberately signing a do not resuscitate order under false pretenses, while actively inquiring about the financial benefits of her impending death, Beatrice demonstrated clear documented intent to hasten Meredith's demise for profit." Beatrice shook her head frantically. "No, no, no. That is absurd. A judge will never uphold that interpretation. The hospital security footage, the signed medical fraud, and your recorded phone call have already been reviewed by a probate judge this morning," Mr. Kaplan stated coldly. The ruling was instantaneous. By attempting to orchestrate her daughter's death to secure her assets, Beatrice has triggered the Slayer statute. I leaned forward, finally delivering the killing blow. "What that means, Mother, is that you are legally treated as having predeceased me. You have forfeited your entire claim to Dad's trust. You have disinherited yourself. Every single penny, every property, and every offshore account is now solely under my control. You get nothing." The realization hit Beatrice like a physical blow. She slumped back in her chair, gasping for air, as her empire of lies and greed crumbled into dust right before her eyes. The heavy silence in the conference room was broken only by Beatrice's ragged breathing. Trey stared at his mother-in-law, his arrogant smirk entirely wiped away. He tugged nervously at his silk collar, suddenly looking like a man who had stepped onto a landmine and heard the dreadful click. He looked toward the heavy glass doors, perhaps calculating if he could simply walk out and pretend this disastrous meeting had never happened. Mr. Kaplan did not give him the chance to retreat. The formidable lawyer reached into his battered leather briefcase for a third time. He bypassed the standard legal documents and withdrew a thick, starkly crimson folder. Against the dark, polished mahogany of the table, the red cover looked like a glaring warning siren. Mr. Kaplan handed it down to me without a word. I rested my fingertips on the bright red cardboard and slid it smoothly across the table. It glided over the polished wood and bumped gently against Trey's perfectly manicured hands. He flinched as if the folder was physically hot. "Go ahead, Trey," I said, leaning forward and resting my elbows on the table. "Open it." Since you are so deeply concerned about my financial competence, I decided to do a comprehensive audit of your financial competence. Trey swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing sharply. He glanced at Whitney, who was still staring at her mother in horror, and then back at the crimson folder. With trembling fingers, he flipped it open. The first few pages were printed spreadsheets heavily highlighted in yellow. Behind them lay copies of wire transfer receipts, Cayman Island bank routing numbers, and highly detailed profit and loss statements for a corporate entity called Apex Holdings. I watched the remaining blood drain from Trey's face. His eyes darted frantically across the numbers, his jaw going entirely slack. "You see, Trey?" I continued, my voice steady and echoing clearly in the large room. "When you assumed control of Dad's secondary investment portfolios 2 years ago, you promised the family a guaranteed 12% annual return. And for a while, the quarterly statements looked fantastic. But my forensic accountant is incredibly thorough. She noticed that the dividends being paid out to Mom and Whitney were not coming from actual market gains." Trey slammed the folder shut, his hands shaking violently. "You hacked my private servers. That is illegal. This is inadmissible garbage." "It is not hacked," Mr. Kaplan corrected smoothly, adjusting his silver cuffs. "It is a matter of public record if you know which offshore shell companies to subpoena. You made incredibly sloppy digital footprints, son." I kept my eyes locked on Trey. "You did not invest the trust money. You used it to cover the massive catastrophic losses you took in that commercial real estate venture down in Miami. You have been running a textbook Ponzi scheme for 24 months. You took Dad's money to pay off your early investors before they sued you, and you have been falsifying the family trust ledgers to make it look like the principal was still sitting safely in blue-chip stocks." Whitney finally snapped out of her shock regarding her mother. She whipped her head around to stare at her husband. "Trey, what is she talking about? Where is my inheritance?" "It gets worse." "Whitney," I said, shifting my gaze to my sister for a brief moment, before zeroing back in on the sweating man across the table. In order to cover up the missing millions, Trey had to forge the annual K-1 tax forms for the entire family. He has been systematically lying to the Internal Revenue Service to hide the missing capital. That is not just poor wealth management. That is felony tax evasion on a multi-million-dollar scale. Trey stood up abruptly. His chair tipped backward and crashed loudly against the floor-to-ceiling windows. "I am leaving. I do not have to sit here and listen to these baseless accusations. I am calling my own attorneys." "You can call whoever you want," I said, remaining perfectly still. "But you might want to call a criminal defense specialist. My accountant is a mandated reporter." When she uncovered the severity of the wire fraud and the tax evasion, she was legally obligated to report it. "That red folder is just a courtesy copy for you." The original dossier was handed over to Special Agent Harris at the FBI's White-Collar Crime Division at 8 o'clock this morning. The letters FBI hung in the air like a death sentence. Trey let out a sound that was half gasp, half sob. The meticulously crafted facade of the successful, wealthy investment broker shattered instantly. Pure, unadulterated panic took over. He looked wildly around the room, his chest heaving as the reality of federal prison materialized before his eyes. Then, like a cornered animal, he turned viciously on his own allies. He pointed a shaking finger directly at Beatrice, who was still slumped in her chair. "It was her. She made me do it." Beatrice's head snapped up, her eyes wide with fresh terror. "You lying bastard. I told her the Miami deal was going south," Trey screamed, his voice cracking hysterically. "I told her we needed to tighten our belts. But she refused. She demanded her monthly distributions be doubled so she could buy that ridiculous villa in Tuscany. She told me to find the money from the trust, or she would have me fired and blacklisted from every country club in Chicago." Trey Whitney shrieked, standing up and grabbing his arm. "Shut up! Do not say another word! Get your hands off me!" Trey roared violently, shoving his wife away. I am not taking the fall for this family. I am not going to Leavenworth. Because your mother is a greedy sociopath. She forced me to siphon the trust. She knew the returns were fake. You ungrateful little rat! Beatrice hissed, suddenly finding her voice and slamming her fists onto the mahogany table. I gave you your career. You were a glorified bank teller before you married my daughter. Trey ignored her, leaning across the table toward Mr. Kaplan, his eyes wide with desperate pleading. I have emails, I kept everything. I can prove Beatrice demanded the fraudulent transfers. I will testify against her. I will give the FBI everything they want. Just tell them I want a plea deal. I sat back in my leather chair and watched the magnificent implosion. In less than 5 minutes, the united front that had smugly tried to strip me of my human rights had devolved into a pack of rabid wolves tearing each other apart to save their own skins. The silence that followed Trey's explosive confession was shattered by a sound I had never heard before. It was a raw, visceral gasp from Whitney. She turned her entire body toward Beatrice, her perfectly sculpted face contorting into a mask of absolute horror and rage. You knew Whitney's voice started as a fragile whisper but rapidly escalated into a glass-shattering shriek. You knew he was stealing my inheritance, my money, and you let him do it so you could buy a vacation house in Italy. Beatrice scrambled backward, her chair squeaking loudly against the hardwood floor as she tried to put distance between herself and her furious daughter. Whitney, darling, listen to me. He is twisting the truth. I simply asked for a minor advance on my own dividends. I had no idea this incompetent fool was committing federal fraud to get it. Trey let out a sharp, manic laugh that bordered on hysterical. He yanked his phone out of his pocket and slammed it onto the table. A minor advance. You drained her entire trust sub-account to zero. Beatrice, you bought the Tuscan villa, the new Porsche, and you used the rest to quietly cover those massive gambling debts you racked up in Monaco last spring. Whitney's money is completely gone because you demanded it, and you threatened to ruin my career if I told her Whitney looked like she had been physically struck. She stared at the phone, then at her husband, and finally at her mother. The golden child, the one who had spent her entire life basking in Beatrice's unconditional favoritism, was finally realizing that her mother's love had a very specific price tag, and Whitney had just paid it. I am ruined, Whitney whispered, burying her face in her hands. Her diamond rings caught the harsh fluorescent light, a sharp contrast to her sudden destitution. The closing on the Hamptons' house is next week. We have no money. I am married to a felon, and my own mother robbed me blind. Oh, stop being so dramatic, Whitney. Beatrice snapped her maternal facade, entirely dropping to reveal the cold, calculating woman beneath. You have always been entirely too dependent on me anyway. It was family money, and as the matriarch of this family, I had every right to reallocate those funds as I saw fit. Beatrice stood up abruptly, her movements sharp and rigid. She smoothed the front of her designer blazer and reached for her Birkin bag, clutching it like a shield. Her chest was heaving, but she forced her chin into the air, desperately trying to salvage whatever shred of dignity she had left. I am done with this, Beatrice announced, her voice trembling slightly, despite her arrogant tone. I do not have to endure this disrespect from a hysterical daughter, a criminal son-in-law, or a deeply ungrateful middle child. She turned her furious gaze toward me, her eyes burning with pure venom. Keep your pathetic little digital marketing company, Meredith. Keep Arthur Kaplan and his ridiculous parlor tricks. I do not need a single dime of your newly discovered wealth, and I certainly do not need your permission to live my life. I have my own assets. I have my reputation. I am going back to my beautiful home in Oakbrook, and I am locking the gates. None of you are ever stepping foot inside my mansion again. She turned on her heel, her shoes clicking aggressively against the floor as she marched toward the heavy glass doors of the conference room. She genuinely believed she could just walk away, isolate herself in her multi-million-dollar suburban fortress, and let the rest of us burn in the inferno she had ignited. I wouldn't be so quick to head back to Oakbrook, Mother, I said. My voice was quiet, but it carried perfectly across the massive room, stopping her dead in her tracks. Beatrice slowly turned around her hand, hovering just inches from the brass door handle. Her eyes narrowed into suspicious slits. "Excuse me?" I did not answer her directly. Instead, I gave a slight nod to Mr. Kaplan. The formidable lawyer reached into his battered leather briefcase for the fourth and final time. He did not pull out a standard legal document. He pulled out one last folder identical in its stark blood-red coloring to the one currently sitting in front of a hyperventilating tray. Mr. Kaplan did not slide this folder. He stood up to his full height and simply dropped it directly into the center of the mahogany table. The heavy thud echoed through the room like a judge's gavel finalizing a life sentence. "What is that?" Beatrice demanded, her voice losing its haughty edge, replaced by a sudden creeping dread. "That," I said, leaning back in my chair and crossing my legs, "is the final piece of the puzzle you thought you were so cleverly putting together. Since you brought up the Oak Brook mansion, I think it is only fair we discuss exactly who owns the roof you are planning to hide under." Beatrice froze. Her perfectly manicured hand slowly fell away from the brass door handle. She turned back toward the table, her face a mask of confusion mixed with rising panic. "What are you talking about? My name is on the deed to that house. It has been in the family for 30 years. My grandfather built that estate. You cannot touch it." "Your name was on the deed, Mother," I corrected her gently, almost sympathetically. "But a deed is only as good as the equity behind it. And you have absolutely zero equity left in those walls." Mr. Kaplan opened the final red folder. He pulled out a thick stack of documents stamped with heavy notary seals and official county clerk insignias. "When Trey's fraudulent well began to run dry 6 months ago, you needed cash to maintain your extravagant lifestyle," Mr. Kaplan stated, adjusting his silver wire-rimmed glasses. "You took out a massive second mortgage, then a third. You leveraged the Oak Brook estate to the absolute hilt through a series of predatory shadow lenders who did not ask pesky questions about your income verification." Beatrice scoffed, though her entire body shook violently. "Those are private corporate loans. I have a generous grace period. I am currently renegotiating the interest terms with the underwriters. You have no business looking into my private banking matters." "You were renegotiating," I said, leaning forward and resting my chin on my steepled fingers. "Until last week, when your primary shadow lender decided you were too high of a financial risk and sold your entire debt portfolio to a private equity firm called Obsidian Holdings, LLC. Trey gasped loudly. Even in his panicked, hyperventilating state, his financial brain connected the dots. He looked at me, his eyes wide with absolute horror. "Obsidian Holdings. That is the parent company of your digital marketing firm. I saw it on the tax returns I was trying to audit." I offered him a tight, humorless smile. "Bingo. I own Obsidian Holdings. Which means, Mother, I own your debt. All of it. Every single penny you owe on that sprawling suburban fortress now belongs to me." Beatrice staggered backward, her expensive heels catching on the plush carpet. She hit the glass wall of the conference room hard, clutching her Birkin bag to her chest, as if the leather could somehow protect her from reality. "You cannot do this," she whispered, the haughty matriarch completely vanishing. "You are my daughter. You cannot call in those loans. I am your mother. The woman who signed a do not resuscitate order to have me killed for a payout does not get to play the mother card," I said, my voice dropping to a freezing razor-sharp whisper. I stood up from my leather chair and walked slowly around the massive mahogany table. The only sound in the room was the clicking of my heels and Whitney's muffled sobbing. I picked up the top document from Mr. Kaplan's folder and walked directly up to Beatrice. She shrank back against the cold glass, trembling uncontrollably, her eyes wide with a terror she had only ever inflicted on others. I shoved the heavy legally bound document directly into her shaking hands. "This is a formal court-approved notice of foreclosure, because you defaulted on the terms of the original loan agreements by missing 3 consecutive balloon payments. Obsidian Holdings exercised its right to immediately seize the collateral. The county judge signed off on the eviction notice at 9 o'clock this morning. Beatrice stared blindly at the thick paper. Tears finally spilled over her lower lashes, ruining her perfect makeup and streaking dark lines down her pale cheeks. Eviction numb. Please, Meredith, I have nowhere else to go. The Tuscan villa was seized by the Italian tax authorities last month. I need time to find an apartment. I need time to pack my antiques. You do not have an apartment, and those antiques are collateral, I stated coldly. I checked the sleek silver watch on my wrist. You have exactly 8 hours. It is currently 9 in the morning. The DuPage County Sheriff will be arriving at the Oak Brook gates at exactly 5 o'clock this evening to change the locks and secure the property on my behalf. Whatever clothes you can fit into your car by then are yours. Anything left inside becomes the sole property of Obsidian Holdings. Whitney let out a loud wail, burying her face in her arms on the table. Her dreams of Hampton's estates and high society galas were shattered into a million unrecoverable pieces. She was entirely broke and married to a criminal. Trey was staring blankly at the wall, muttering under his breath about plea deals and wire fraud, completely detached from reality as he waited for the FBI to kick down his door. Beatrice slid slowly down the glass wall, crumpling onto the carpet in a pathetic heap of designer fabric and broken pride. The arrogant woman who had spent her entire life stepping on my neck to elevate herself was finally at the very bottom, clutching a worthless piece of paper. I turned my back on the wreckage of my family. I walked over to the table and nodded at Mr. Kaplan. He calmly packed his briefcase, snapping the brass latches shut with a satisfying, echoing finality. I did not look back as I pushed through the heavy glass doors and walked out into the bright Chicago morning. They had walked into this high-rise law firm, expecting to strip away my freedom and steal my hard-earned wealth. Instead, I had burned their empire to the ground, and they were leaving with absolutely nothing. Exactly 24 hours later, my cell phone vibrated against the cool marble of my kitchen island. The caller ID displayed a generic local number, but I already knew exactly who was on the other end. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my morning coffee, savoring the absolute quiet of my sanctuary, before sliding my finger across the screen to accept the call. The sound of jagged, hysterical sobbing instantly flooded the receiver. It was a harsh, pathetic contrast to the calm sunlight streaming through my floor-to-ceiling windows. "Meredith, please!" Beatrice choked out, her voice entirely stripped of its usual aristocratic polish. "You have to help us. Please, I am begging you." I leaned back against the counter and listened without interrupting. The background noise alone painted a miserable picture. I could hear the distinct aggressive rumble of heavy semi-trucks blasting past on a nearby highway, accompanied by the muffled, continuous crying of my sister. "Where are you?" I asked, my voice flat, completely devoid of the sympathy she was desperately hunting for. "We are at a roadside motel off Interstate 55. Beatrice wept, her breath hitching wildly. "Trey is gone. He took the last Mercedes and whatever cash was left in the emergency safe while we were frantically shoving our clothes into trash bags. He just abandoned us, Meredith. The federal agents raided the Oak Brook house right before your sheriff arrived to change the locks. They seized Whitney's designer bags. They froze all my remaining credit cards. We have absolutely nothing left. We are sitting on black plastic garbage bags in a room that smells like cheap bleach and stale cigarettes." She paused, gasping for air, desperately waiting for me to offer a lifeline. "I need you to wire me some money. Just a few $1,000s so we can get a decent hotel in the city and hire a defense attorney. You have millions, Meredith. You are my daughter. You cannot leave your own mother and sister to rot in a place like this." I let her desperate pleas hang in the empty air for a long, heavy moment. I wanted her to hear the absolute silence on my end. I wanted her to feel the vast, unbridgeable chasm she had dug between us with her own 2 hands. "You are right about one thing, Beatrice," I finally said, my tone ice-cold and utterly unyielding. "You are sitting exactly where you belong, but you are profoundly wrong about me. I am not your daughter. Not anymore. A mother protects her child. A mother does not forge medical documents and sign a "do not resuscitate" order to hasten her daughter's death for a financial payout. A sister stands by her family. A sister does not eagerly participate in stripping away her siblings' fundamental human rights to fund a vanity lifestyle in the Hamptons. Meredith. Please, we made a terrible mistake, Beatrice wailed, the sheer panic in her voice reaching a fever pitch. We were desperate. It was not a mistake, I corrected sharply, my grip tightening slightly on the phone. It was a calculated, malicious strategy. You spent my entire life treating me like a disposable asset, a convenient scapegoat you could kick whenever you needed to feel superior. You thought my quiet endurance was a weakness you could exploit indefinitely. But boundaries are not a negotiation, Beatrice. They are a consequence. And you are finally experiencing the permanent consequence of 30 years of unrelenting toxic abuse. I took a deep breath, feeling a profound, undeniable sense of liberation wash over every nerve in my body. The fear and obligation that had chained me to her for 3 decades simply evaporated. Do not ever contact me again, I said clearly, making sure every single syllable landed with absolute crushing finality. Do not call, do not write, and do not expect a rescue plane. The empire of lies and greed you built has burned completely to the ground, and I will not let you drag the toxic ashes into my new life. Enjoy the motel. Goodbye, Beatrice. Wait. Meredith. No, please, I beg you. I pulled the phone away from my ear and pressed the red button. The line went completely dead. Without a single second thought, I opened my settings, blocked the number, and permanently deleted her contact file from my phone. For the first time in my 30 years of life, the heavy, suffocating weight of my family's expectations vanished entirely. I was finally truly free to write my own story. Have you ever had to walk away from the people who were supposed to love you the most? Have you ever had to draw a hard line and cut off toxic family members to protect your own peace and sanity? It is the hardest decision you will ever make, but sometimes it is the only way to survive. Let me know your stories of setting boundaries in the comments below. If my journey resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more authentic stories of resilience, taking back your power, and rebuilding a life that is completely yours. Share this video with anyone who might need the courage to walk away from a toxic environment today. Thank you for listening, and remember, your peace is worth protecting at all costs.